Every day, at exactly 5:15 p.m., a weathered German shepherd emerged from the trees. He stood at the edge of an old highway crash site, motionless, staring into the distance. Locals thought he was just mourning someone. But then, one retired firefighter noticed something terrifying. The ground beneath the dog was moving. What was buried there would unravel a decade-old secret and expose a truth no one was ready for. Have you ever witnessed an animal show unexplainable loyalty? This story, it's one of the most powerful you'll hear this year. The wreck happened 5 years ago, on a lonely stretch of County Route 74 in upstate New York. A narrow, tree-lined road, sharp turns, no shoulder. Deer often darted across at dusk, causing tragic accidents. But this one was different. The driver vanished. The crash site abandoned. Just a twisted, rusting Dodge Ram smashed against an old oak tree. The engine was cold for hours by the time emergency services arrived. Nobody ever found a body. Since then, not much changed, except for the dog. About 8 months ago, residents of the nearby town of Millfield started noticing him. A German shepherd visiting the site. Every day just before sunset, he'd trot down from the hills, stand quietly beside the wreck, never barking, never sitting, just waiting. The townsfolk started leaving scraps of food, water bowls. But the shepherd, nicknamed Ranger by someone, rarely touched them. Some thought he was waiting for his owner. Others thought he was feral, and a few believed he belonged to the ghost of the missing man. But it wasn't until Bob Jenkins, former Millfield fire captain, was driving home one chilly Wednesday that things began to shift. He slowed as he passed the wreck site, glanced at the dog out of habit, and then slammed the brakes. The ground right where the dog stood was shifting. Bob Jenkins wasn't one for superstition. At 67, he'd seen his fair share of odd events. He'd pulled bodies from burning homes, rescued trapped motorists from icy rivers, and he was the one who responded to that crash 5 years ago. But this was different. The dog, Ranger, wasn't reacting. He stood eerily still as the soil near his front paws gently rose, like something breathing beneath the earth. Bob stepped out of his truck, his old knees protesting. "Hey, boy," he called gently. Ranger turned and stared at him. His eyes weren't wild or feral. They were intelligent, focused, calm. Bob saw the telltale notches in the dog's ear, the faint scars under his coat. This wasn't just any dog. He was a retired K9. "Where's your handler, huh?" Bob murmured, crouching down. "What are you guarding?" The ground moved again, just slightly, but enough to raise goosebumps on Bob's arms. He backed away and took out his phone. The sheriff's office wouldn't believe him if he said the ground was breathing, but they might if he said a body was buried there. Sheriff Alton Hargrave showed up with 2 deputies and a shovel. At first, they thought maybe an animal was tunneling under the earth. But when they dug just 2 feet down, they hit something solid, metal, and beneath that, a plastic. It took another hour and a call to forensics. Before they unearthed a sealed military-grade locker, the kind used to store tactical gear, rusted around the hinges but intact. Ranger, watching silently from the edge, never moved. Inside the locker, they found an old water-damaged manila folder, a GPS device with a cracked screen, and a blood-stained tactical vest, stitched with the letters K9 Officer Dax. Bob froze. He remembered that name. Dax had served with Sergeant Thomas "Tommy" Rowell, an Army Ranger turned K9 handler, who came home with PTSD and a distrust of civilian life. 5 years ago, Tommy disappeared. People thought he faked his death or fled after a DUI crash. But Bob, he never believed that. The sheriff looked from the vest to the dog. "You don't think?" Bob nodded. "I think that dog is Dax." They took the vest out gently, laid it on the tailgate of Bob's truck. The moment it was exposed, Dax let out a low, mournful whine. He stepped forward for the first time in hours, touched his nose to the vest, and sat. Bob knelt beside him, placing a hand on the shepherd's broad shoulder. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You've been waiting, haven't you?" Later that night, Bob went home and dug through old contacts. calling a man he hadn't spoken to in years, James Callahan, a former army buddy who'd served with Tommy. The call went to voicemail, but at 3:13 a.m., Bob's phone rang back. "Bob?" The voice was rough, gravelly. "I got your message. You found Dax?" "Yeah," Bob replied, "and maybe more. That crash 5 years ago. It wasn't no accident, was it?" There was silence. "Then I'm on my way." What nobody knew yet was that Dax's daily vigil wasn't just about waiting. It was about guarding something, buried far deeper than anyone expected. James Callahan arrived 2 days later, driving a weather-beaten Jeep with plates from West Virginia. He was in his early 70s now, slower, leaner, his gray beard thick. He carried a cane, but his voice still had command. He hugged Bob tightly, then walked to Dax. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, kneeling beside the shepherd. Dax sniffed him, ears perking ever so slightly. James smiled. "You remember me, don't you?" Bob stood quietly beside them. "Tell me the truth, James. Was Tommy running from something?" James nodded grimly. Tommy never trusted what he saw when he came back from Afghanistan. Said he'd been followed, watched. "I thought it was just trauma talking. When he stopped answering calls and then crashed out here, I didn't think..." He stopped. "What?" Bob pressed. "I didn't think anyone would go far enough to bury evidence. That locker, that wasn't just gear. That vest, those bloodstains, that was meant to disappear." Bob looked at Dax, and he wouldn't let it. With the sheriff's quiet permission, they brought in a ground-penetrating radar team. The area around the crash site had been ignored for years, assumed to be closed. But when the radar swept over the soft earth where Dax stood, the screen lit up with anomalies. Buried containers, metallic boxes, and about 6 feet deep a hollow cavity. They dug carefully. Every shovel brought tension. Finally, they struck what looked like the side of a rusted oil drum. But when they pulled it free, it wasn't a drum. It was a sealed makeshift coffin. Inside, a badly decayed corpse. Military dog tags rested on its chest, blackened and worn. "So, Thomas Rowell." Bob and James both stepped back, stunned. "What the hell?" Bob muttered. "If Tommy died here, then who crashed the truck?" Dax growled, low and primal. "Because someone had just arrived behind them." A black SUV pulled up slowly to the roadside. Tinted windows, civilian plates. A man stepped out, mid-40s, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right, his eyes scanning everything too carefully. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, flashing a badge. "Agent Monroe, Federal Investigations Unit. Got a call about potential military remains discovered?" Bob exchanged a glance with James. The sheriff hadn't mentioned anything to federal agencies yet. "So, how did this man know?" "Who told you?" Bob asked, his voice firm. The agent smiled thinly. "Let's just say Tommy Rowell's file has a long tail. We'd like to take over from here." But Dax stepped forward suddenly, his body tense, teeth bared. It was the first aggressive move he'd made since they'd found him. And James knew why. "Bob," he said under his breath, "Tommy used to say if anything ever happened to him, it wouldn't be a stranger. It'd be someone who used to wear the same uniform." Agent Monroe reached for his phone. Dax lunged. The agent stumbled back, narrowly avoiding Dax's teeth. "Control your dog," he shouted. "He's not my dog," Bob said calmly. "And if he doesn't like you, that means something." Dax stood between the group and the agent, hackles up, his growl low and unwavering. James took a step forward. "You're not here on official orders, are you? You're cleaning something up." Monroe's face hardened. "Rowell stole sensitive data from a Black Ops unit. That man was no hero," Bob scoffed. "He died in the woods guarding it, with his dog beside him for 5 damn years. That's hero enough for me. Within hours." The sheriff declared the site under county jurisdiction, pending formal investigation. Monroe was escorted away, but not before threatening consequences. They sent Tommy's remains for identification. The story would eventually make the local paper, but not the full story. Only Bob, James, and Dax knew the truth. But there was still one more mystery left, because 2 days later, Dax returned to the crash site. And once again, he stood over a different patch of dirt. Dax stood still as always, but this time, several feet away from the previous burial site. The area hadn't been disturbed in years. No one had reason to dig there, but Bob had learned by now to trust Dax. With quiet urgency, he called the sheriff and James. Same time every day, same behavior, but a different spot, Bob said. Watching Dax circle and then sit firmly on the edge of the embankment. Another scan, another set of anomalies. They began to dig carefully, slowly, and within hours unearthed a second military locker. Inside, a sealed hard drive wrapped in layers of plastic and foil, and another blood-stained file folder. This one had photographs, maps, names. One name stood out, Agent Monroe. James opened the folder, reading aloud. Operation Frost Shadow, illegal rendition, unauthorized detainment sites. It all came together. Tommy hadn't been paranoid. He'd discovered something buried by a shadowy program that never wanted to be exposed. When he tried to leak it, he was silenced. And Dax, he'd been guarding the evidence ever since. That evening, James sat on the porch beside Bob, while Dax lay at their feet, resting for the first time in days. The wind whistled through the trees. A storm was coming. You think Tommy trained him for this? Bob asked softly. James nodded. He used to give Dax silent commands, little routines. I wouldn't be surprised if he gave Dax a final order before he died. Protect this. 5 years, Bob whispered. 5 winters, 5 storms. This dog didn't leave his post. He's a ranger's dog, James replied. And rangers don't retreat. The hard drive and files were sent to a confidential investigative journalist, someone Bob trusted from his firefighting days. They knew better than to try the official channels again. Soon, the truth would come out. Of covert operations, wrongful deaths, and the quiet whistleblower who tried to stop it all. But the town of Millfield, they'd always remember it differently. Not as a scandal, but as a story of one dog's impossible loyalty. For the first time in 265 days, Dax didn't appear at the crash site. Locals who'd grown used to seeing him, some who even stopped to sit with him during their evening walks, noticed right away the food bowl lay untouched. The roadside flowers hadn't been sniffed. Bob went looking heart-tight in his chest. He found Dax beneath the oak tree, the very one Tommy's truck had hit. Dax was lying down, his breathing shallow but steady. The vet confirmed it was exhaustion, stress, and age. But Dax had one more mission left. Bob leaned down and whispered, "It's okay, buddy, you did it. You can rest now." Dax closed his eyes. 3 days later, the local sheriff's office held a quiet ceremony. They laid a plaque by the roadside, in honor of K9 Dax, for guarding the truth when no one else would. And beside that plaque, a small American flag fluttered gently in the wind. Months passed. The article finally ran. Whistleblowers' truth guarded by K9 for 5 years. Military cover-up exposed. It made national news. And suddenly, the quiet town of Millfield became a symbol of unshakable loyalty and quiet heroism. Bob and James still meet on the porch every week. They share coffee and stories. They talk about Tommy, not as a victim, but as a man who never gave up trying to do the right thing. And they talk about Dax, not as a pet, not even as just a soldier, but as a brother in arms. A statue now stands by the crash site, modeled after Dax, standing alert, eyes forward. Tourists come and leave flowers. Veterans salute. Some just cry, because loyalty like his isn't common. And when the wind blows through the trees on a quiet evening, some say they still hear the jingle of a dog's collar and the soft, steady sound of paws in the dirt. Dax never left his post, not even when the rest of the world forgot.